Okay, everyone. We're going to make a start. Okay. All right. So.
I'm taking my jacket away.
So today is Isru Chag. Isru Chag, right? Isru Chag, yes? The day after Yom Tov. And Isru Chag literally means to bind to the festival. That's literally what it means, Isru Chag. And specific halachic reference in temple times, relevant. But particularly today, one of the significant aspects of Isru Chag, that sense of binding to the festival, is the idea of continuing the themes of a Yom Tov, and there is no better way of doing so than coming together the day after Yom Tov to learn Torah, to continue the cycle, to keep moving forward. You know, we point out a number of the classic commentators point out that you have this period between Shavuot and Simchat Torah, which is just over 4 months and 2 weeks thereabouts. And it is a time when one can particularly focus on trying to acquire and understand more ideas and concepts in the Torah, so that when one gets to Simchat Torah, one can properly celebrate. That's why we have the Simcha delayed, and it's not, it would have been easy to have synced the cycles of the Torah reading to complete the Torah on Shavuot. It makes a lot of sense in a way, because then you would do everything at once. We receive the Torah, we begin again, but we don't do that. Not because we like to be complicated, but because there are deep reasons in everything we do. And one of the aspects is that we have to have that receiving of the Torah, and then we have to understand it and learn it and study it. And that's what we're doing together. So we're going to look at Parshas Naso. Now, Parshas Naso is actually a very confusing parsha. And I don't just mean in terms of the content. I just mean in the sequence. So the beginning of the parsha, I'm just going to a little bit of an overview here, so we know what we're talking about. If you've got the Art Scroll Chumash, it's actually very helpful, because it gives you little notations in the margin that tells you what's going on in each part of the parsha. And you'll see what I mean. It's very confusing. The beginning part is a direct continuation from the previous parsha. Another story why it's split in that way. We split the roles of the Leviim in such a way that it's partly dealt with at the end of Parsha Bamidbar and partly dealt with Parsha Naso. Not a theme for today's shir, but it's a very interesting question as to why that occurs and why it's done in that way. And then once we complete the roles of the Leviim, we have a sequence of parshiot of separate subjects that are seemingly unrelated. But as we will see, they are very related, and we're going to deal with a number of them in this shir. The first of those parshiot, which is at the beginning of chapter 5, if you've got a Chumash, is a command that certain people who are ritually impure have to be sent outside the camp, chutz l'machana, outside the camp, and within that there are various different places they have to go to, depending on their level of impurity. You then have the parsha of those who commit to what is called literally means commit trespass. We're talking about this. This means someone who steals something and then swears falsely, and they have to bring a korban as well as repay what they've stolen. And it deals with the question of those people who ostensibly don't have anyone to receive that. They may have no inheritors at all. Where does it go to? Where do you repay to if the person is no longer living? Then we have the parsha of the Sota, which begins on chapter 5, verse 11. The only scenario in the Torah that is trial by ordeal. That is what it is. It is trial by ordeal. It's the only example in the entire Torah of that, where the person, a woman who is accused of committing adultery, has to drink the water, etc., etc., and that verifies whether she is innocent or guilty. That is the parsha of the Sota. And then we have the parsha of the Nazir, right? Which is the beginning of chapter 6. The parsha of the Nazir, the man who takes the man or woman who takes a vow to become a Nazir, become a Nazirite, right? So they can't certain restrictions that apply to them. And then we have, at the end of that, we have the Birkat Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohanim, Yivarechecha Hashem v'Yishmerecha. And then the second half of the parsha, of course, is the laning for Chanukah, the gifts that were given by the Nasirim, the princes. So it's a very confusing parsha. It's a very kind of kaleidoscope of different things, and the question is, how does it all fit together? We've entitled this shir "The Search for Balance in Life," and a primary focus of the shir is actually going to be on the Nazir. Very interesting idea and concept. We're going to try and understand what it means, what it's trying to achieve. But to introduce that, I want to take you through a series of comments made by the Ralbag. Now, the Ralbag, who I don't know if we've studied before in terms of these, maybe we have, I can't recall of this shirim this cycle, and that is the Ralbag, very, very interesting personality. Rabbi Levi ben Gershom, known as Gersonides, and he died in 1344, lived in France. He was considered very much in the very, very rationalist school. You know, there are different approaches to Parshanut, to how to explain the Torah, more mystical, more rational. He's very much of the rational school, you know, probably the extreme, even the extreme end, if you like, you know, of that particular approach. Because of course there are some of our classic commentators that are kind of what we call a shilov, you know, they're a mixture of both rational, also mystical, but he's very much of the rationalist school. He was also an expert mathematician, very fascinating. He wrote a book in 1321 called Maaseh Choshev, which means to like calculate, right? A mathematical book. And he was a mathematician. And very interestingly, I was looking into this today. So there are some theories that he proposed in mathematics that were completely original and became widely accepted later by other famous mathematicians. And if you look in certain mathematical works and detailed texts, they will quote Gersonides as the first to deal with this. There's something called mathematical induction. I'm very bad at maths, so don't ask me what it is. You can look it up, mathematical induction. Gersonides was the first. He's recorded in mathematical texts as being the first to actually deal with this at length. Why was it that he wasn't so well known as some of the other famous mathematicians in history? Very simple, because he wrote in Hebrew. Right? He wrote it in Hebrew. His book Maaseh Choshev was written in Hebrew, so that people didn't understand what he'd written. Just incredible to understand a little bit about these figures these great figures of our history that we are dealing with. So he basically provides us with a pathway of linking many of these parashas, what the connection is, okay, between them. And this is the first source over here. So the first one is this command, Tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'shalchu min hamachaneh, right, to send out from the camp. Kol tzara v'chol zav, there's a typo, sorry. Kol tzara v'chol zav v'chol tomei lo nefesh. You have to send out from the camp anyone who is in this state of impurity for whatever reason. As I said, this is the beginning of chapter 5. He says like this: Achar shestider inyan hamachaneh. After we have encountered and ordered the rules around the camp itself, the encampment, and the, of course, that was last week's parsha, where the people went, the flags, the tribes, the whole arrangement, etc., and the roles of the Levites. It now talks about, in other words, there it's all about the kind of the completion and the perfection and how everything has to be correct around the tabernacle, etc. Now we deal with, there are certain negative things, there are certain negative issues that need to be dealt with, and that has to be removed. And he says, the idea is that in order to do this, that he says, I've already explained, just to summarize what he says in Sefer Vayikra, the idea of ritual impurity and what that means. We're not going to go into that here. But he says that there is a need to understand that certain individuals, for whatever reason, whilst they're in that state of ritual impurity, they need to be sent away from the camp in order not to contribute to or detract from the purity and sanctity that exists within the camp. And within that, there are different levels of that level of purity and impurity. Okay. But then he says, what is the next parsha about? So that's the first stage. The next one is Ish Shoki. In other words, he's linked it to the whole idea of, setting up the camp. The camp should be perfect. Therefore, you've got to understand that some people need to step outside that camp temporarily while they're ritually impure. Fine. Next one is, what is this repetition? What is this repetition that occurs when we encounter a parsha? The second one is very short, which is on verse 5, begins on verse 5, which talks about people who steal, those people who steal, and they swear falsely. And Rashi already raises the question that this is a repetition, which has already been dealt with. It's already been dealt with in Vayikra. And Rashi tells us that there are two specific reasons that it is repeated. One is because it talks about the fact the person had to pay an extra fifth, and also the korban called an asham, a guilt offering, and that would only apply if they confessed. Okay, so that's one reason. And another reason is because there's this idea of gezel hager. If you steal from a person who converts and they don't have any relatives because they're a convert, it's like they're born again, they don't have any relatives, what happens is the theft has to be repaid to the Kohanim. So Rashi tells us that's why it's repeated here. But the Ralbag tells us that the reason why it's mentioned here, he says, it would seem it's based on a very specific reason, because there is spiritual impurity that a person may have and may need to step outside the camp. But there's also negativity in the camp that can come from strife and arguments and machlokas. And that's what this parasha is dealing with. It's talking about someone who steals from someone else. That's the epitome of someone who creates strife. You understand? And therefore, it's telling us that a person has to be careful not to take hold of their friend's money, right? Inappropriately, incorrectly, wrongly. And not to rely on the fact that this other person is weak. I can do what I like with them, to overpower them. Especially she'ein lo galim, because it might be someone who converted and doesn't have any relatives, and they might feel, listen, I can take advantage of them. So what the Torah does is, it says those who are the least protected in society, which might be those who have converted to Judaism, they don't have any blood relatives. Though what happens, they become the most protected, because you're obligated to return the theft if they're no longer alive to the Kohanim, who are the highest status in society. You understand? So it's kind of rectifying an imbalance that potentially exists. So the second stage, and you'll see he's building up a whole picture here. The first stage is removing spiritual impurity from the camp. The second stage is a progression. It's almost saying, right, okay, fine, spiritual impurity. What about the physical negativity in the camp? That can't exist either. And that's why this is placed in this position. Next, we have the Parsha of the Sota, which begins with verse Yud Aleph, 11. And why is that therefore? He says the third paragraph, skip the bold print. This reason why this is the next one, because the previous Parsha was to remove strife and machlokas that exist in the whole community, the whole society. This one is to remove strife from the house. This is about family peace. This is about what goes inside a home, inside a house. That is the upshot, that is the message of the Parsha of the Sota. Now he says, we know that Shalom Bayit, right, peace in the house, is before peace of the community or the nation, right? It's more important. That's a question he's asking. So why is it placed afterwards? How do I know that it's more important? Listen to who he quotes. Lefima shenitbaer bephilosophia hamedinit. What's philosophia hamedinit? The philosophy of nations. He says, I know this because this is how countries operate and work. They require the family units to be strong, and that means that the overall country and society remains strong. Rabbi Sachs wrote extensively about this, right? The Home We Build Together and all the books that he wrote about strengthening the nuclear units within a society strengthens the society as a whole. This is what the Ralbag is writing in the 14th century. V'lom, however, he says that the Torah begins with the peace that is in a sense more honored or more lofty, I think, which is actually, even though really it should be, it's afterwards in the order, the family really comes first, and it completes it first. He says you find this custom in the Torah in many, many places. In other words, yes, it's true that the Shalom Bayit is of greater significance, it has to precede the Shalom HaMedina, like the whole community, but at the end of the day, it begins with the highest level, and the highest level is the community. That's kind of like the overarching superstructure. We begin with that first, right, as represented by these rules about theft, and then we move to the nuclear units of the family, okay? Right, stage 4 is the Nazir, right? What is the Nazir? What is the fourth parsha, which is the beginning of chapter 6? The idea of a person making a vow to be a Nazir. This parsha is next to the parsha of the Sota. As we said, the focus of the Sota is to remove this idea of strife, and it's a message, it's a lesson, that's the whole point of it, to remove that from the absence of Shalom Bayit. We now come to the next level, and that is the individual person, that is the human being, as an individual. Because as much as we are all parts of society, and we are often, if a person is fortunate enough to be part of a family unit, then they're also part of a family unit. But ultimately, we are also responsible for ourselves as individuals. Mitzad teshukato hagufit, right? That in order for the desire and the wish that we have, naturally, we have natural desires, asher yiviyehu lechet, that bring a person to sin. and to reduce and relieve that that internal strife that we have. That is what is preceded in order by the Shalom Bayit and the Shalom Medina, as we said, of the whole country, the whole community. Right? This is why, and the Torah puts this last in the order. Okay? This is the idea. It seems to be that what assists, I think what he's trying to say is what assists a person in working on themselves is being part of that wider picture, the community and the family, and then the person is able to focus on themselves as well, right? Even though in a way that's the primary idea. And the whole idea of the Nazir is to help a person find a way, or someone who's Yetzer Hara takes over them. How do they deal with it? One of the ways of dealing with it is to take this vow not to drink wine. He says because wine is often the sign and causes the Yetzer Hara and all bad things to happen, the evil inclination, etc., etc. So that is the principle of the Nazir. What we're going to try and do is learn how the Nazir is relevant today, where we don't have people taking Nazirite vows, even though in recent history there have been some famous examples of Nazirim. There was a famous Nazirite in Jerusalem, Rabbi David Cohen, was known as the Nazir. He was known as the Nazir because he was supposed to have taken a vow of Nazir, very long hair, never cut his hair. His son was Rabbi Shaya Sheva Cohen, who was the Rav of Haifa. Right, that's right. Right. Yeah. So there you are, right? So anyway, his father was a famous Nazir of Yerushalayim. So in other words, but this is very unusual. The problem with taking a vow as a Nazir, which is definitely not advisable for anyone to do that, what's the biggest problem? You can't get out of it. Because the only way to get out of being a Nazir, as the Torah tells us, is to bring a korban. So if a person can become a Nazir, but they cannot get out of it again, so that's not a good idea, right?
Can you be a temporary Nazir?
No. You can't. You can only have to bring a korban. So you can't bring a korban, so you're stuck.
Doesn't one of the other commentators say, that may be similar to what you're saying, that the gaps particularly with the Nazir is because the Nazir sees the degradation of
yes, that is it. Chazal say that.
Well,
Yeah. Absolutely, we'll come back to that. 100%, we'll come to that. The sages say there is a specific link between the Sota and the Nazir. If a person would see Sota Bekil Kula, they would see this happen to a Sota, they should take a vow themselves not to drink wine. That's what the Gemara says. If they've observed what has happened, to kind of like learn the lessons, etc. Okay, that's another specific thing. But I think what the Ralbag has given us, it really is incredibly helpful in what appears to be a confusing parsha, has given us a really helpful structure for understanding it, right? How we begin with the idea of the camp itself needing to be pure and complete, this whole beautiful camp that they built up with the Mishkan, right? And then the three levels of the perfection of society, on the society as a whole, the family, and then the individual. So what we're going to do now is try and understand and go deeper into the ideas and the concept of the Nazir and see what we can learn from it. So the Ibn Ezra tells us, Ibn Ezra died 1167 in Spain, one of our, of course, most important classic commentators. He explains two words. Let's look at the pasuk so we can see these words very clearly. We are at the beginning of Perek Vav, chapter 6. So the pasuk says, okay, the second pasuk, pasuk base. It says, Dabel b'nei Yisrael, speak the children of Israel, aleihem, you shall say to them, Ish Isha, a man or woman, ki yafli lindor neder nazir lahazel Hashem, who makes a vow to be a nazir and a Nazirite to Hashem, and then etc. etc. And then the rules apply. These two commentaries of the Ibn Ezra. One is on this verse, and one is on pasuk vav, right? Verse 6. So let's see that one as well. Yeah. So it says. No, actually, sorry. It's actually. I think it's actually on Zion. One second. Sorry, it's on Zion. Sorry, not 6, 7. Okay. He's not allowed to become Tomei to any of the closest relatives. Because Nezer Elokov al Rosho, because the crown of his God is on his head. Okay? This is a clear link between the word Nazir and a clue as to what the word Nazir really means. It says Nezer Elokov, the crown of his God. Okay? Again, as we learn this, keep in mind, there are three primary restrictions on a Nazir. A Nazir is not allowed to drink wine or any products of grapes. A Nazir is not allowed to cut their hair, exactly, yeah. Cut their hair, they have to let their hair grow long, etc. And they can't become tomei, can't become ritually impure. Those are the three primary rules that apply to a Nazir. So the Ibn Ezra tells us, explains each of these words. Yafli, that word yafli, what does it mean yafli? Yafli is a word which we translate, it's hard to translate actually. Rashi explains it as to say explicitly, to be explicit, right? So he says yafrish, it means to separate, or Yaseh Davar Pele. The word Yafli means like a wonder. He does something wondrous. What is the wondrous thing a Nazir does? Because he goes completely against human nature. Human nature is to follow one's desires. That's the natural human state. That's the reality. Difficult reality to state, but that's the reality, right? What is the wonder of the Nazir? The wonder of the Nazir is that he's able to put spiritual needs over physical ones. And that means it's already a wonder. It's a wonder for a person to do that, to put themselves in a position where they really want to fulfill a physical need and they actually go for a spiritual one, in this case abstaining from wine, right? This is a big deal. So that's the first explanation, the first clue as to what the Nazir is trying to achieve. The second one is the word Nazir. He says, look at the next comment, the Yesh Omrim. He says, some say, Ki milas Nazir, the word Nazir, megizras nezer, that it comes from the word nezer, which means a crown. V'ha'ed ki nezer elokov al rosho, these words, the crown of his God is on his head. Ve'inenu rochok. This idea, he's quoting other people who say this is not such a strange idea. This translation, he says, in my view, is not such a distant concept. V'da, you should know, ki kol b'nei odom avdei tava sa'olam. He says the whole world are servants to their desires. V'hamelech be'emes, and the true king, sheyesh lo nezer v'ateres malchus barosha, that has a crown of kingship on their head, is kol mi shu chofshim and hatav, is someone who is free of desires. That's the crown. That's the king. Why? Because who are they king over? Themselves. Themselves. A person who is constantly running after pleasures of this world is no king, is a slave. Is a slave to this world, a slave to earthly desires. This is part of the human condition. But a person who is able to break free from that acquires a measure of royalty. So we've already learned a tremendous lesson, right? What is the idea behind the Nazir? It is a direct response to those who say that kingship and royalty exists by those who are born into a particular family, right? Or those who have money or wealth or power or anything else, which so many other ancient societies, that's it. That was the only passport you had to achieve a high status. And the inspiring message of the Nazir, ki nezer elokov al rosho, that the crown of his God is on his head, is that an individual person with no background and no status can take upon themselves the crown of kingship. And that crown is the crown of ruling over themselves. You know, this idea of what a person is actually in control over. It's a very famous mashal. There's a famous parable of the rabbi who comes to a new town and decides that he's got such amazing ideas. He looks at all the problems of the world. I'm going to solve all the problems of the world. Right? He starts and he gets so excited. All the problems. He's got these amazing ideas, and he realizes it's a bit much to chew on. He's taking on a bit too much. So he decides, okay, I'm going to change. I'm going to solve all the problems of the town. At least my town I can solve, right? Say all the problems. So he tries that. It also doesn't work. So then he says, okay, listen, let me just work on my family. Let me try and solve the problems of my family. And that also doesn't work. And he realizes the only person who can change is himself. And, you know, this little parable, right? And that is what human beings are like. That is when we come to a realization that ultimately, the greatest change we can effect is on ourselves. And this really fits so beautifully with, there's a famous Tana Devei Eliyahu, a midrash which is ascribed to Elijah the prophet himself, where it basically says that everything, it doesn't matter where a person comes from. Isha, it says, I think, ever the shivcha, man, a woman, a slave, a maid, so it doesn't matter who they are, everyone is able to rise to the level of a Kohen Gadol even. I think, I can't remember exactly what the phrase is, but it's an amazing thing. And that is the one lesson we learn from the principle of the Nazir. What is the second thing we learn? So if you turn over to the next page, the Ramban, Nachmanides gives us another clue into what exactly the Nazir is trying, what is being achieved through the Nazir. The Ramban comments on Pasuk 11, right? Pasuk Yud Aleph. Let's look at Yud Aleph. This is where we describe the purification ritual, and it says that on the 8th day he has to bring the turtle doves, there's certain korbanot, offerings. The Kohen brings one as a sin offering, one as a burnt offering. The Chipper alov mashechat ala nefesh, and he has to have atoned for him because he has sinned for over a soul. The Kiddushes Rosha B'Yomahu, and he sanctifies his head on that day. What is the purpose of the sin offering? A sin offering is brought when a person has sinned, hence the name, right? What has the sin of the Nazir? The famous question that is asked. What is the sin of the Nazir? Says the Ramban like this, top of the next page, number 3. V'tam hachatos. The reason for the sin offering, it is not explained why he has to bring a sin offering. He says the simple explanation is this person sins when he completes his Nazirite-ship. He's just sanctified his whole life. He's just put his life on hold in certain ways. He's made himself a higher level than everyone else. And he should really continue. And he should really stay in that place, holy, and with a crown on, keep the crown on the rest of his life. As it says, he brings a pasuk in Amos, I will make arise from your children, Linavim, as prophets, and from your youngsters, Nazirim. This is the primary line I wanted to bring out to you for this Ramban. He says that the verse links and compares the Nazir, the Nazirite, to a prophet, to a Navi. Okay? As it says that all the times when he's a Nazir, he's holy to Hashem. So he needs an atonement because he's now going to go back to, live a regular life. And as a result, he's got to bring a korban, he's got to bring a sin offering. Because really, he should stay what he's doing, but he can't. He's only managed it for a temporary period of time. So what is this comparison with the prophet? What is the comparison with the Navi? So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, who was the famous Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Mir, led them during the war. We quoted him a number of times. Fled to Shanghai with the Mir Yeshiva during the Second World War, and he says like this: and this is a little quote here, number 4, just a little few lines, right? Naziris derech kedusha, that this idea of taking the vow of being a Nazir by way of holiness. This is a person who has done this in order to wage a battle with the evil inclination. As they say, and this is the Gemara you referred to before, a person who sees what happened to the Sotah should take a vow of a Nazirite. Why? Because they should learn the lesson. They've seen something that's happened, a tragedy that's happened as a result. This is a tragedy that's happened as a result of a certain sequence of events. So he should take a vow to restrict himself from wine. And if that's the case, then this person is equivalent to a prophet, to a Navi. What is the purpose of a prophet? What does a Navi do? The whole purpose of a prophet was to tell the people what the right thing to do is. The Navi would come along and say, Isaiah, Yirmiyahu, this is the right, you've got the wrong idea, we should be doing something different, we should be living a different life. A Navi is someone who's able to wake people up and to get them on the right path. And in that way, the Nazirite is the same, the Nazir is the same. The Nazir is someone who basically wakes themselves up and doesn't allow themselves to continue in this trajectory, in this path in life. So you see that although we may not have Nazir, the concept of Nazir nowadays, there are so many different things we learn from the Parsha of Nazir. Do you know there's another thing also which the commentators don't point out, but I heard this a number of years ago. I remember when I was in yeshiva. There is a concept called, you have to make a siyag LaTorah, fence around the Torah, right? So that is the idea that rabbinic restrictions exist in order to prevent us coming close to transgressing a Torah law. Where do you see that idea in the Torah? Where do you see this idea that if there's a certain prohibition, this idea that you go beyond that, like muktzah, so you don't come to use it, therefore you can't move it on Shabbos, right, or Yom Tov, right? Where do you see that concept in the Torah? The answer is you see it in the Nazir. Because the Nazir, primary problem with the Nazir is what? Wine. What is he not allowed to do though? What does it say? Look at verse 4, Pasuk Dalet. It says, Kol Yemei Nizro, wherever he's a Nazir, he's not allowed to go anywhere close to wine. He can't have used the pips and the skins of the grapes. Anything. It's not alcoholic. It's not intoxicating. So you see that from the Torah itself, we learn this idea of borders around coming close to the thing itself. Of course, these are all biblically forbidden to the Nazir, but the principle you see from the Nazir. Very interesting, right? So we learn a lot from the Nazir. We learn a lot about the struggles that we have with ourselves. And this is brought out so beautifully in a Rashi with the commentary of the Meshech Chochmah. So let's look at the Rashi first. Verse 13, Yud Gimel. Very interesting phraseology in this passage. V'zos Toras HaNazir. This is the law of the Nazir. B'yom melos Yemei Nizro. On the day when his Naziriteship is completed, Yovi Oso El Pesach El Mod. He shall bring him to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Now Rashi picks up on that word. It shouldn't say Yovi Oso, right? What should it say instead? Yovo, yeah, he should come. What does it mean? Yovi Oto. Oso. What does that mean? Yovi Oto. So Rashi says, I've got it here, I put it here. Yovi es atzmo. It means he has to bring himself, like literally pick himself up and bring himself. And this is one of the three cases Rabbi Yishmael explained the word es or et in that way. And he brings the other, so he brings the other two. One is a verse in reference to the in Vayikra to do with I'm not sure what it is. Anyway, to do with they bring themselves to a sin or whatever it is. But that's one reference. And then they have the famous one of Moshe himself, right? Vayikbor oso vagai, right? That he buried himself, right? He was buried himself. What is the depth of that? What does that really mean? That he brings himself. Well, was that relevant to a Nazir? So the Meshech Chochmah tells us the following. Meshech Chochmah, classic commentator, 19th, 20th, early 20th century. And he says like this. Okay, can you see this right hand side? How long a person remains a Nazir is not mentioned in the Torah explicitly. That the idea is that it should be as long as necessary. That's the primary length of time. He brings a Gemara that talks about a story that talks about this, that a person would take upon themselves something however long they need. Yeah, he says everyone should measure themselves, I'm just sort of skipping through the English, how much they need in order to battle the negativity within them. Okay? And therefore that's not something it can be measured, etc., by anything external. Now, 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the end of the first column. And the test, lodas, to know, how do you know when he's reached the level? When does he know that he's overcome? How do you know he's overcome the problem? He's overcome the evil inclination and not going to take him in the wrong place anymore. It's when he's able to step outside his own body, so to speak, and look at himself as he looks at others. That's the test. If he's able to be in so much control over himself that he's able to judge himself like he judge others. We're brilliant at judging others. We're so good at it. We're so good at it, right? The test of a person reaching this level is when they can sort of have this outer body experience, where they can actually reflect on themselves the way they reflect on others. Such a beautiful idea. And his heart is not suspect in the love of himself, not twisted by their own rationalization. The human brain has endless capacity for self-rationalization, right? That's what we do all the time. Then he knows he'll now be able to re-enter the normal world, and take with the right mezeg. You know what mezeg is? What's mezeg avir? Yeah, it's like the climate. Yeah, it's balanced. He's nimzog is to pour and to mix, right? You get the right mixture. That's how it is. He's able to get the right mixture. And he won't come to extra things. And he'll be able to enter society properly in a nice way. Okay? All of this asceticism, this is not the way. Hashem doesn't want us to live our lives, says the Meshech Chochmah, that we are permanently removed from the pleasures of this world. This person enters this state as a medicine, right? It's a medicine. It's like temporary medication. He doesn't want to do it all the time, right? as it says, the Naso is a chote in that sense. This is the opinion that says the sinning is the fact that he's had to remove himself from the world when he should be enjoying it. It's what Hashem has given it for in the right way. And that's why it says, Yovi Oso. He brings himself like he would schlep along someone else. With the outlook that he would see an external, another person, the shokol b'moznei tzedek, and he weighs up with these right scales of righteousness. That's how he's able to look at himself. What an amazing idea in these two tiny words in the Torah. Yeah, Yavi Oso. He brings himself to get to a level which is an incredibly, it's a difficult thing to do, but it's a fascinating concept. That you can actually sort of step outside yourself and be able to look at yourself as you look at others. That's a lesson, another lesson we learn from the Naso. Okay, so well, conscious of the time, let's see what we can get through. So the second idea, sorry, it's where is it? Number 7. That's right, number 7. Yeah. So I'm going to summarize the question of Chaim Shmulevitz asked. In the same passage, he asked a very simple question, which you all should have asked me as soon as I said the 3 things that the Naso is not allowed to do. Which is the odd one out? Remember, cut your hair, let your hair grow long, drink the wine, and what? Don't become tummy. What's the odd one out?
The last time, because it's the only non-physical.
No non-physical, and more than that, it would help him. I mean, tragically, no one wants to be involved in a tragically, levaya or shivas and things like that. But actually, we know from many of our sources that that's the best way to learn, the realities of life and think about life and reflect on the, this is the pasuk. He brings the pasuk in Koheles. Tov lo leches al beis evam al leches al beis mishta. A person goes to a house of mourning. That's the natural human need. They realize life is finite and reflect on the important things in life. So why are we taking the Naso away from that? He's the person who wants to learn that. You see the problem. You can understand the other two, because the wine is what led him astray, or it represents that in many ways. And the idea of the hair is about external beauty, right? Which we can also understand. Too much emphasis on external beauty. There's a famous story in the Gemara about someone who becomes a Nazir because he says to I think it's Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach, Rabbi Shimon HaTzadik, that he saw his reflection in a mirror, and he was like busy preening himself and his locks and whatever, these long kind of, and he realized that's not the way for me to live, and therefore he takes a vow as a Nazir, etc. So those two make sense. But what is wrong, this idea about becoming Tamei? And therefore, really, he says that you should be able to go there and learn what it means to think about how one's days are limited, etc., and all the important things we need to reflect on in life. So he says like this. The answer is found in a very cryptic and short Baal HaTurim, comment of the Baal HaTurim. Look at number 8, one line. The Baal HaTurim says, on the words, Al nefesh meis lo yovo, he's not allowed to become Tomei for a deceased. Lo malach to tell you, she'im tishrei of shchina machnas nizro, if the divine presence rests on him because of his being a Nazir, shelo yomru shu doresh el hamesim. They might think that he is being doresh el hamesim. You know what means doresh el hamesim? It means necromancy, seeking the dead. The story of Shmuel, Shaul, when they brought up, you know what I mean? The witch of Endor, right? When they brought him up from the dead and everything else. And this is what called Doresh al Hamesim. It's forbidden in the Torah. You're not allowed to go and seek the deceased, like consult the deceased. Is kind of this is included in all the witchcraft type of things. Okay. So what's the thing? What's he saying? You know why he can't become Tamei? Nothing to do with the reason he became a Nazir. Because he might get to a certain level where the divine presence rests upon him, and everyone will say, you know why he's getting prophetic visions or whatever, because he's gone the path of witchcraft. He's gone, they'll say if he goes into a cemetery, people will assume that's linked to his kind of spiritual experiences that he's experiencing at this level of prophecy. So Chaim Shmulevitz says there are 2 incredible lessons which are unrelated from this passage of this idea of the Baal HaTurim. The first one is, number 1, that he seems to be telling us that a person who takes a vow to be a Nazir is able to shoot so high in his spiritual level that he may well have a communication with God. He may well have a prophecy. You understand? And therefore he can't go into a cemetery because then there's a risk that people are going to say that it's not a real prophecy or spiritual communication, and actually it's witchcraft and hocus pocus and communication with the dead. You understand? So you see that this person is really a person who actually takes a step to do this type of thing, can actually really kind of shoot themselves up spiritually. As low as people are physically, they're able to reach great heights. Okay, that's message number one. That's what he says. Roy miyad lahashras hashchina. Second line. He says immediately ready to receive the divine presence. But then he says a very interesting second approach. Different, totally different approach. I want to look at this one inside. Second, it's the paragraph after the white line. You see, halfway through the page. The Yesod base anu lamedim. We learn a second foundational principle, and this is as follows. It's true, he says. There would be an amazing benefit to the Nazir if he would walk into a tragic situation like a cemetery or a person who's passed away. He'd learn all the lessons he was trying to learn about how life is limited and focus on the meaning in life and everything else. You would see what sin can cause. But, since there would be a concern, people might say that he is expounding the dead. This slight concern. People might come along and say, "Oh, he's involved in witchcraft and hocus pocus." You can see how it might happen. This guy's got long hair and he's doing, I think he's a bit of a, what are they called? Whatever. Yeah. Al Kain, therefore, Osraso Torah le'eskarev lamesim. The Torah forbade him to come close to the deceased. Why? Look at this beautiful line. She'ein la'odom. Yeah, lischos. A person should not merit b'ma'alos, to not try and merit their own lofty and spiritual levels, increase their spiritual levels, b'mokum, in a place shekayim chashash, where there is any small concern, sheyifko b'malas horabim, that he might cause damage to the public and to society as a whole. You understand? So he's turned it completely on his head. He said this person is on a mission. What mission is he on? To make himself more spiritual. It's an amazing thing, praiseworthy. Wow, an incredible thing. Why is he not allowed to become Tameh? So he should always remember that don't become someone who's removed from society to such an extent where you might make others in society around you stumble into thinking that you're involved in necromancy or dodgy stuff. You could say, I don't care. I'm on my spiritual journey. I don't care. And I'll do what I think is right. You understand? I'll do what I think is right. And if I think it's right to go and spend a night in a cemetery or something, I'll go and do it. And he's told no, because a person is never allowed to increase their own personal spirituality if it will cause damage to the public and to society. You have to achieve balance in life. And this is such a beautiful idea. It's such a fact. It really helps us understand what it is the Torah wants us to learn from this parsha. It's not about whether or not we become a Nazir or not. It's the lessons that we learn, the different lessons that we learn from this parsha, right? And we see from here also, I think, perhaps, what the connection is between the fact, and this is the final idea I wanted to share with you, the fact that if you go straight after the parsha of Nazir, look at verse 22, okay? It's verse 22, Pasuk Kaf Beis. What does it say? Speak to Aaron and his children, saying, right? This is how the Berkas Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohanim. This is the Psukim, right? You know, these are the oldest. These three Psukim, there is a relic that was found in a first century tomb in Israel. Not first century, sorry, first time in the first temple. There's a relic that was found in an amulet found in a tomb from the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, with written on it, Yivarechecha Hashem Yishmerecha. These psukim are the oldest ever found outside the Torah. Do you understand? They're found from the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, right? Yivarechecha Hashem Yishmerecha. So the Ibn Ezra tells us, this is source number 10, he says, why is it that the Birkas Kohanim is next to the parsha of the Nazir? Kasha hishlim Torahs HaNazir shu kodosh, hiske Torahs Kohanim shem kedoshim. The Nazir is holy, right? The Nazir is holy. So it makes sense that we link that with the Kohanim and the blessing that they give, because they are Kedoshim, they are holy, they have to attain a holy status, they have to be in a holy state, and they bless the Kohanim and they bless the people through that, right? But the reality is, maybe, that this is exactly the point. Why are they linked? They're linked because we cannot live our lives in such a way that we only absorb that holiness for ourselves. So a person has to know, yes, this is really important. To work on oneself is critical and it's essential, and all these wonderful lessons from the Nazir. And we've gone through so many of them. The idea that to become a true king, that word Nazir, Nazir, is a person takes the crown upon themselves. To work on oneself, that's how a person becomes a king. The Nazir is like a Navi. He provides direction and guidance. To the extent, as we said, Yavi, he can detach himself from himself and actually kind of see himself externally. That's an amazing level to reach. Or a human being can reach that level, that they really are honest about themselves and really able to assess where they are and where they want to get to. And yet, the Nazir can't become Tameh. The Nazir can't become Tameh, and as the Baal HaTurim tells us, because otherwise that might trip other people up. They might think that he's involved in some hocus pocus. One second. So we avoid that. And that is what we have to avoid. And therefore we move perhaps from the sanctity of the Nazir to the Kedusha of the Kohanim. And what do we say that the Kohanim do? The Kohanim are the ones who epitomize and represent holiness. What do they do with their holiness? Bless the children of Israel. Use that holiness, bring it to others, bring blessing to others. That is our mission. Our mission is not to stay on the top of a mountain in an ascetic way, that we don't involve ourselves in the life and times of the society that we live in. Our mission is to bring that to others, to allow them to grow and to develop and build from that. And that is the final source, which you know at times, which is the Netziv. The Netziv says, what does it mean? V'yishmerecha. Yeah, Yivarach Hashem v'yishmerecha. He says, every bracha boy shmira. Every bracha needs protection. Because brachas are wonderful, right? But if a person merits brachot, blessings in life, you need to protect it and guard it and use it properly. A person can be in a certain position where they may merit lots of learning, so they have to be careful not to become haughty. All sorts of things. There's always a protection. He says, it shouldn't turn into an obstacle, right? It should always be something that the blessing is in the right place for the right means, the right purposes, and not to let the blessing become an obstacle. So there's so much we learn from this parasha of Nazir. Hopefully now you'll all see it in a different way than you've ever seen it before.
I was just going to say that maybe there's something else topical. Our enemies revel in death, don't they?
Yeah.
And the Nazir must.
Correct, absolutely. So the Nazir, who is in this kind of spiritual status, exactly, is not consumed by that. Very important, very good, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.